Welcome. This is David from Krigsgrav. And we're just kind of doing something a little special here. So, as you've probably seen by now on our social media, that October of this year is actually the 20th anniversary of the formation of Krigsgrav, which is wild to think about and to say out loud, but I just wanted to do kind of a little discussion, talking about the early days, because to me, I'd say from about 2012 onwards, everything we've done has been pretty much in the public eye to some extent. Everything's pretty easy to find, interviews and our releases, and ever since we've been signed to labels, basically, everything's pretty out in the open for us. But the time before that is still kind of mysterious, I guess, because for a long time it existed very much still on social media, but it was simply on places like MySpace and things like that. Things that have been lost over the years. But it wasn't very public, and I think there's still a lot about the early days of Krigsgrav that people still don't know, including my own bandmates, which this is half the reason I'm doing it, is because over our years playing music together, there'll be these little tidbits, these little stories that I'll share of, oh, this reminds me of when Krigsgrav first started, and we did this and did that. And they laugh at some of these stories, and they're like, you should record yourself telling these tales so you can always remember them. That was kind of the seed that was planted for this idea, and I figured this was as good a time as any with the anniversary coming up. So I'm gonna kind of go into. I'm not going to talk about all the albums, because like I said, a lot of our more recent output is very much available out in the open there. So I'm just going to talk about the real old stuff, basically. Maybe play some snippets here and there from those releases, and just tell some stories from back in the day and what has led us down this road, this journey for 20 years. So, by the way, you very likely will hear my cat in the background at some point of this, because he is persistent. He will be scratching at me while I'm talking. He's got a sixth sense for when I hit record on something. Okay, well, if you may or may not know, I am the founding member of Krigsgrav, the only one that's kind of been there from the genesis of it all the way up until now. By no means does that make me the leader of the band, because that's just not a thing in this band. It wasn't even a band in the early days, but I will say that it has been made exponentially better since it turned into a full band, for sure. And we kind of view this very much as an equal partnership. And it needs to stay that way, creatively and everything in between. I love where the band is at these days. But yeah, in order to talk about the beginning of Krigsgrav, I kind of need to do a little about the author here, because it does tie in. It formed not that long after I started playing instruments. I was not very good. So I started playing drums when I was 13. By the time I was 14, freshman year of high school, I graduated high school in 2005, so this was probably 2001 or so. Still not very good at drums, didn't have a double pedal. I acquired one that year from some kid in my speech class who looked like, he was about to go play 9 holes at a golf course somewhere. He did not look like a metalhead at all, but he ended up being a big Cannibal Corpse fan, and saw me reading a Terrorizer magazine at my desk one day, and just started talking to me. And he, when he found out I drummed, he was looking to sell his double pedal, so he sold it to me, and that was a game changer for me. But formed a band freshman year of high school, We were a cover band, really, meant to be more of a Metallica cover band. And we could barely play, frankly, but all we did was play covers in the dining room at my parents' house, which is amazing that they let us do that. But that's really where I honed the skills, started learning double bass and things like that. By this point, I was starting to listen to like Immortal and stuff like that, so the idea of doing blast beats was there, but I was not good at it at all, nor did I really need to be at that point with the material we were playing. But those guys, we rehearsed all the time. It was like every day after school, basically, we'd meet at my house and play for a couple hours until it was time for them to leave, go eat dinner, all that kind of stuff. But they would leave their instruments, more often than not, in the dining room at my parents' house, just rather than lug them back and forth. So that's where I learned how to play guitar and how to play bass. It was a combination of just messing around with their instruments that they would leave, and I knew how to read tablature and things like that. So I started teaching myself some of the Metallica songs that we were playing and things like that. And then same with bass. And we kept that going for all of high school, really, but it didn't go anywhere. We had very few originals. We fancied ourselves a thrash band, so we were kind of more in the vein of like Testament, Practice What You Preach era, where they started kind of writing catchier songs. It was less all about speed and aggression and all that kind of stuff. So we had a few originals under our belt, but we didn't really play hardly ever. We only played live a few times, usually for the school, some sort of battle of the bands, or just things. We played a pep rally once and played Judas Priest, Electric Eye, and it went over about as well as you'd expect for us to be playing a song that was, you know, at the time over 20 years old, and no one got it. But yeah, I mean, it served its purpose. We all got better as musicians, learned more about recording ourselves and things like that. We had a shitty karaoke machine that we would put in the center of the room, and we'd load it up with a cassette tape, and we'd connect one microphone to it, because that's all you could connect to it. And we would experiment with just moving the mic in different spots of the room to where it would kind of pick all of us up evenly. And we would just record ourselves, some of our originals and some of our covers, and listen back and just think it was awesome. But yeah, that band kind of fizzled. You know, by the time we were reaching the end of high school, I was drifting into more of a more aggressive direction. I had gotten way into, you know, the German thrash, Sodom, Creator, and Destruction, things like that. And then that started transitioning into getting into more extreme metal from there, Morbid Angel and stuff like that. And the other guys in the band, you know, the singer, he was more interested in just chicks, which is fine, but he just kind of sold off his gear and didn't really care about the music anymore. Guitar player, Mike, rest in peace, he was always more of a prog guy and loved Dream Theater and Queensryche and things like that. So I think he wanted things to kind of head into that more melodic direction, and it was just kind of a natural separation. There was no animosity or anything. But yeah, at that point, end of high school, band broke up. I was kind of down in the dumps for about 3 or 4 months there and didn't really know who I would play music with at that point. They were the only musicians I knew that played metal. All the other ones in high school just played, you know, kind of emo stuff that I was not into. But then, yeah, I just decided, before high school was done, Krigsgrav actually formed first when it comes to the bands I was in. But like before the high school band, which we were called Blood Legacy, by the way, before that one dissolved, I had started Krigsgrav. We didn't have that name yet, but it was my good friend Chris. I'd known him since 6th grade and stayed at his house all the time, and vice versa. And he got me into a lot of stuff. Like, I always credit kind of him and my older brother for my musical path, my musical tastes, because he was a little over a year older than me, Chris was. And he seemed to always get it before I would get it. So he would have something new that he liked, a new band that he liked that he found. Like he'd be listening to Deicide or something, and I would say, man, I don't know about this. I don't really get this, you know. But then fast forward 6 months later, and I'm totally into it. It would take me longer to get into this stuff. But he was the one, especially with black metal, because the production was always, you know, pretty sketchy, pretty rough. But no, he was the one who kind of got into Dark Throne. He let me hear In the Nightside Eclipse, and I just did not like it at first because the production was so rough and abrasive. I wasn't into it, and it would just take a while for it to sink in, for you to appreciate, you know, the music. So he started kind of planting that black metal seed, and I was really growing to enjoy all of it, Borknagar and Dimmu Borgir and things like that. And I just kind of said, like, we had a bomb threat called in at our high school, which we all knew was bullshit. I think even the people at the school knew it was bullshit, but you have to go through the routine. You know, you got to evacuate everybody, call the fire department, police, they come through with the dogs, everything's fine, then they let you back in the school. So we were just waiting out there, and this was October of 04. And it wasn't cold, I remember, but it was cool outside. So they had us all out kind of in the bleachers by the football field and stuff like that. And Chris was talking to somebody else, and I was talking to somebody else, and then my conversation wrapped up, and I was just kind of standing there thinking. And I just kind of tapped Chris on the shoulder and said, hey, I kind of want to start a black metal project. I said, I don't know if it would be a band or what, but I said, I think I can play all the instruments. Do you think you can sing? Because I've heard you sing along to these records kind of quietly whenever we'd be sitting around playing Nintendo 64 or something at his house and be singing along to Dimmu Borgir. And he sounded pretty good, but it's low volume, you know. So I said, I've heard you do it quiet. You think you could sing loud? And all he said was, I can try. I can give it a try. So that was it. That's how it formed. And from there, I owned this little red Fostex digital 8-track recorder. That was my big, you know, recording investment. And it had a million buttons and switches on it and stuff, and I knew how to use maybe 10% of them. So I had recorded after he had agreed and said yes. In true David fashion here, I love doing covers. I love cover songs. And I'm terrible as far as taking any liberties with it, which kind of defeats the purpose. If you're going to cover it, you kind of should put your own spin on it, but I've always respected when people make a cover that's really true to the original. So I used to do covers a lot. So I recorded a cover of Transylvanian Hunger on there and a cover of Freezing Moon. And I feel like there was one more, but I just did that mainly to serve as backing tracks for Chris to see what he can do. And he came over one day. At that point, we had moved. The house that I was in with Blood Legacy, practicing in the dining room and all that in the early parts of high school, we had since moved to a different part of Keller, Texas. And at this point, we were on a corner lot. It was a 2-story house. We had moved on up in the world. And on the second floor was this just spare room that became the music room. I had my drums kind of permanently set up in there, and I had this big bulky desk that I had the recording stuff on, which was nothing, basically, the little Fostex, and a few little microphones. And so he came in there and recorded himself. Took him maybe 3 tries, I'd say. The first 2 were sounding really Cookie Monster-ish, and he just needed a few attempts to kind of find his voice. And even then, his voice changed and was shaped differently, you know, as time went on, and he found what works for him more. But he found something that sounded like a black metal voice, and he was recording some Freezing Moon lyrics, and then he was just kind of freestyling as well, singing some just random Marduk lyrics or something. And we both just kind of looked at each other with a thumbs up of like, yeah, like that. If you're going to do that, that'll work for sure. And that was kind of it for a while. at that point, Krigsgrav was not something that I was, full steam ahead. This is my band now. This is my focus. It was just this thing. And it was meant to not reinvent the wheel. I just wanted to play some pretty straightforward black metal, maybe do a few covers, and have fun with it, and explore that side of my musical tastes. Because I was still very much rooted in like thrash and things like that. That's what I felt came most naturally to me at the time. But then things shifted. Because when high school was done, we still didn't have a name at this point, by the way, so we were kicking around different ones. I remember Black Winter was one of them, but that was not a very original name at all, and it was already taken by several bands. So that was kind of shelved quickly, but that was the very first name that we thought of. But yeah, when high school ended and I was kind of in that down in the dumps mode of like, I don't really have a band and I wish I did, I decided to start a band just with my friends, basically. Whether they could really play or not was irrelevant to me. I just felt like I need something where the chemistry is there and I'm not starting from scratch trying to get to know people. And we were young. I mean, I was probably freshly turned 18. And that band ended up being Obsidian Throne, which was myself and Chris, also with Krigsgrav. He was the singer for Obsidian Throne because he discovered that he can do low growls very well. So we said, let's start a death metal band. I used that same red Fostex recorder, that 8-track, to demo the first 3 songs, I think it was 3, yeah, for what would be this death metal band, which was Obsidian Throne. But that wasn't the original name for that project either. But anyways, I tracked those 3 songs myself musically, wrote lyrics for one of the songs, and Chris did lyrics for the other 2. But at that point, I was really fixated on bands like Obituary and Grave and stuff like that, so I wrote pretty straightforward. Like even the first 6 Feet Under record, I'm not a 6 Feet Under fan because the majority of their stuff I do not like at all, but the debut I still think is a fantastic record. Super simple, but very effective, so that was kind of the route we were going. But yeah, so it had Chris and it had Craig Roberts, who would reappear later in Krigsgrav as a live member and just kind of whenever we need him, basically. Still good friends with both of them. And then it was Craig's cousin Corey on rhythm guitar, and then ultimately his co-worker as well, Craig's co-worker Brett Elam, joined on lead guitar, and that was kind of the first full lineup of Obsidian Throne. But that band eventually would get more melodic, so it was kind of melodic death metal. But that band really kind of took off as far as chemistry being there. The songs that we were writing were maturing very naturally. A lot more melody getting introduced. So it went from this primitive death metal demo to much more in line with things like Hypocrisy and Amon Amarth and things like that. But looking back, I'm kind of amazed at how much we would open for national acts. Obsidian Throne seemed to get on tons of shows at like the Ridgely Theater in Fort Worth. And we'd have to sell tickets and all that kind of the usual runaround that you get as a young new band and stuff. But we never developed a huge following. But we still were a very tight band that wrote very concise, catchy songs, and we just kept landing all these gigs. And that band continued all the way through, it's around 2011, I guess, is when it kind of finally fizzled. But we had done, a demo, a really professional demo. We did an EP, and then we did a full length that was kind of self-produced, but we just had a professional mix it and master it. And then it fizzled whenever we were working on our second full length. But that band was the main focus for years, and Krigsgrav was not necessarily on the back burner. It's not like I shelved it and said I'll come back to this later. It was ever present, and I was always pecking away at ideas. As you can see in the discography, at the same time I was in Obsidian Throne, things were getting recorded and released for Krigsgrav. So it was always present, but it was never the main focus, I guess, until it became a full band around 2012. So, yeah, where to start here? As far as the intersection between these two bands, the first Obsidian Throne demo was done in 2005, and so was the first Krigsgrav demo. But, as I said, that was not our original name, so that's kind of my first story here, is we kicked around some names. We had the idea to kind of flip the script on a black metal name for an American band, because so many European bands had English band names. So we said, well, why don't we have a foreign band name, just to really throw people off. Plus, it'll kind of add to the credibility, since, you know, black metal is very much Scandinavian with its origins and all that. So yeah, we said, well, people might look at that and think we're a Swedish band and just dive right in, and then they'll be shocked to find out that we're from Texas. So we chose a name that we thought meant like dark forest. So we're like, that's cool, like a spooky dark woods. And it was in Swedish, and that name was Skogsbygd, and came up with a logo, came up with a demo cover, which was hand-drawn by Chris, and the demo was called Of Ice and Shadows. And I remember we went to Corey, the rhythm guitar player for Obsidian Throne. We went to his house about 40 minutes away, and I used his drum kit because he was someone who was also kind of a multi-instrumentalist. He played several things. So he had a little 5-piece kit set up, and I just kind of brought like my own cymbals and stuff. So we went out there because he had a digital recording interface as well, not as small and cheap as my Fostex. His was fancier, more buttons, more switches. So yeah, he said, I'll record you guys. I want some more practice recording anyways. So we went out there and tracked the drums and tracked everything at his house in a single day. There's 3 songs. I don't remember writing them at all. All I remember is one of the songs has a riff that is very much like a rip-off of In the Shadow of the Horns by Darkthrone, but with my own spin on it. But yes, we went there and knocked it all out within a day. Chris's vocals, the levels were all over the place with his vocals because he would go through stretches. He was all about breath control, so if he needed to do a long scream, he would, you know, sing it quietly basically and stretch it for as long as he could. And then if he needed to do a shorter one, he'd scream it loud, so then the level would spike wildly. So the levels were all over the place. But we finished it there and burned like a master copy, and then we just kind of made some burned copies of it and would hand them out to friends or hand them out to people at shows that we would attend. And then things took a turn there where we were forced to kind of pivot direction. Once we started handing this thing out and more eyeballs were on it, then, you know, things came to light that needed to be changed. So, we were handing out copies of this to various people. Pretty proud of ourselves. Not bad for a first ever black metal recording. And as I said, there's 3 songs. I think one of them was 9 minutes, and the other 2 were, 6 or 7. So it was still a decent, amount of music there. and I had printed the front covers for it because Chris drew the original. And then I worked at a retirement home at the time. I was a dining room manager. And they had a copy machine, and they had one of those big, guillotine-looking paper cutter things. So yeah, I would print the front cover 4 times on sheets of paper, or maybe it was 2 times. I don't know if I could fit 4 on there. But yeah, I'd print them off, make copies, the copy machine, and then cut them out on cardstock because I didn't want to just use flimsy paper. Because we were a legit operation here, so had to use high-quality materials. So I'd print it onto cardstock, which I would buy, but yeah, I was basically stealing toner from this retirement home. And then I would chop them up, cut them to size with the paper cutter thing, and bring my little stack home of demo covers and slip them into, I would get these slim cases, plastic cases that had the black tray, and I would just slip them in there. And the CDs that I used for several things, which is dumb because now if you own all of these releases, then the discs look identical basically. But a friend of mine turned me on to these black CDs that you could buy that were black on the top, like matte black on the top, and then the shiny black on the bottom. So there was no silver on them at all. They were solid black. And no markings, no brand names on them, nothing. It's just solid black. So I was like, that's awesome. So I got those, and that's what I used for the first several Krigsgrav releases. But yeah, we were handing them out. And I remember right around this time is when we were scouting out studios for Obsidian Throne to use for our first demo, because we really wanted to pool our money together and get like a professional demo done, because we knew that would just open the doors for us in terms of potentially getting signed, and then having a professional demo would also help us get shows, because then we could show that to, the booking agents and stuff. So we went to Nomad Studios in Carrollton, Texas. And the reason we went there is because we knew that that's where King Diamond had recorded his last several releases. And we were all huge King Diamond fans, still are. And so we called him up and said, the people that they kind of had on staff there were both guys that have worked with King. So they had Sterling Winfield, who did Voodoo, and then JT Longoria. Like Cole Marshall was no longer there, but they had JT Longoria, who had just done Puppet Master and was gearing up to do the next one, which ended up being Gimme Your Soul Please. And we went up there basically to tour the facility and put down our deposit. But we picked a certain date because Gary, the owner of the studio, said to us, King is actually about to start production on this next one. And they're going to be tracking drums. Day 1 of drum tracking is going to be on this day. So if you want to come up on that day to do your deposit and take a tour, you'll get to see King, and you'll get to see Matt Thompson, and you'll meet JT, and you can decide if you want to work with JT or Sterling. And so that's what we did. It was myself and Craig went up there. And at that point, we had our first demo with Obsidian Throne. So we gave that to King, and he was actually pretty enthused about receiving it. Whether or not it just went straight into the trash can, we have no idea. But we ended up chatting with him in the control room for at least 30 minutes, and it was great. But Andy was there as well, Andy LaRock. So he does not tend to stick around in Texas for drum tracking and stuff like that. He usually comes down right before, I guess, they kind of rehearse. They run through the songs together, him and Matt Thompson, so to make sure Matt is, fully up to speed before it's time to track. So Andy was there, and he was in the big room while Matt was setting up. So me and Craig, just these random, I look back on it and I'm just like, how was this allowed to occur? But yeah, the fact that we stormed into the control room, met JT, met King Diamond, sat down and talked with him for like 30 minutes. And then we went in the big room while Matt's just trying to get set up, and we met Matt Thompson and met Andy. So the reason this all circles back to Krigsgrav is because we actually did not have a Krigsgrav demo on us, but I was telling him about this band, this black metal project that I've been starting, and we actually have a Swedish name because Andy, of course, is Swedish. So he said, well, what is it? And I said, it's called Skogsbygd. And he said, what? What is it? I said, Skogsbygd. And he has this smirk on his face, like this knowing grin on his face, like he knows something that I do not. And he just kind of goes, oh, like a little chuckle. He's like, oh, cool, cool name. And I left that day, left the studio thinking, something's not right with that name. Like, maybe it doesn't mean what we thought it means. I need to look into this. So again, we've already printed we've got the logo, printed the covers off, we've been handing them out to people. And yeah, it turns out that a Skogsbygd is basically, it just means forest village, and it has nothing to do with dark or evil or sinister woods or anything like that. It's literally associated with like pleasant, suburban, like just a quaint little village in the forest type thing. There's nothing menacing about it at all. So yeah, felt very stupid. So then I immediately go to Chris and say, we got to change this name. So it actually was not until 2006, because we kicked around a few names and I can't even remember what else was out there other than Black Winter and then Skogsbygd, but I know there was more. But yeah, Chris and I went to Oslo, Norway in 2006, the spring of 2006, just so we could see Emperor, because that was when Emperor announced that they were reforming for 2 exclusive shows. One was at Inferno Festival in Oslo and the other was going to be at the Wacken Festival in Germany. So I said, hey, like, you want to go to Oslo? Cost a fortune, of course, for us to fly out there, but he was like, absolutely, this might be our only chance to ever see Emperor. And then, of course, Emperor has continued to play shows periodically ever since, so there's been many opportunities to see them, but we didn't know that. We thought this was our only shot, and to see them in their home country, like, who could pass that up? So we went, and it was wonderful. I saw Borknagar and Emperor, front row for most of Emperor's set, which was agony. Like, we got in there right away, went straight up to the front, and I basically just clung to the guardrail for the entire day, because I did not want to leave. I didn't want to go use the bathroom. I didn't want to go get a beer. I didn't go do anything. I just stood at the guardrail all day so I could be front row for Emperor. And Chris was not clinging to the guardrail, so needless to say, once Emperor started, he was getting thrown all over the place. I don't even know where he went, but I found him after the show was over. But yeah, I clung on for dear life for most of the set, and then finally was removed by people bigger than me with a few songs left in the set, which doesn't matter. I'll take it. But yeah, while we were there, during the day, it already cost us a fortune to go, so we weren't out just spending money shopping around or whatever that much. So we would just hang out in the hotel room for a chunk of the day. So we were just sitting around, and we put on the TV, and it was a documentary, a World War I documentary, I believe. And it was in English, and so they had Norwegian subtitles on the TV. So, there's the cat. So yeah, there was this gentleman, Englishman, who was an archaeologist or something. So they had dug up this big pit, this big, dumping ground of bodies of French soldiers, and it was in a rural part of France. And he had said something like war graves like these were present all over France, from this time period. So when he said war grave, that was the translation, was Krigsgrav. And I don't think Chris even paid any mind to it, but I just kind of heard that and my ears perked up, and I thought that would actually be pretty cool. Like, it's pretty easy to say. It's you say it just like it's spelled, pretty much. And so I mentioned it to him. I said, "Hey, what do you think of that for a band name?" And he was like, "I like it, you know." So I actually came up with the original logo design, which was used kind of all the way up until I think honestly, I think the Carrion Fields might be the first one that had like our new logo done by the Lord of the Logos himself. But yeah, on Lux Capta Est, it still had very faintly in the artwork there was the original logo that I drew. But yeah, that was kind of the game changer for us. Was like, all right, we've got an identity now. It's not taken by other bands. We know what it means. We actually heard it for ourselves on TV. So we're not going to make fools of ourselves this time. But circling back to Obsidian Throne, we did our first demo there in 2005 with JT Longoria, with whom I'm still very good friends. I actually ended up playing in a band with him for a number of years. But as a result of that meeting and of recording that demo with him, he mentioned being in need of an intern. So I said, I would love to, if you'll have me. Because we bonded over a love of Morbid Angel, and he was shocked that a person my age had heard of the band Massacre. So we would talk about the album From Beyond all the time. But yeah, we just kind of jived, you know, personality-wise. And so he took me on as his intern, which I did for over a year, which looking back was a wild time because I would go to classes for college in the morning, and then I would go to work, just working the lunch shift or whatever and get things ready for the dinner shift at the retirement home. And then I would go straight from there out to Carrollton, which was about 45 minutes from where I live. And I would sit with JT and do a session. And, you know, sometimes those sessions would be done at 9 o'clock, and sometimes those sessions would be done at midnight. But then you'd go home at 1 a.m. or whatever, and then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd do it all again and go to class, go to work, go to the studio. And it was excellent. I'm still not an expert at anything when it comes to recording, because I was an intern, but I wasn't allowed to do much. Like, I did a lot of the physical work of breaking down, you know, all the cables and setting mics up and moving things around in there. But when it came to the real, you know, nuts and bolts of doing the work behind the desk there, that was still JT, and I just kind of observed, would ask questions and stuff like that. But it was around this time period that he gave me, let me borrow. I shouldn't say he gave it to me, because I ultimately gave it back, you know, 2 years later. He gave me his old Pro Tools 001 rig. So if you don't know what that is, a lot of recording software these days, you don't need any sort of hardware for it. You just use the software and that's it. Pro Tools, you needed to buy their DigiDesign, like, hardware interface to run it through. So that was expensive, and it took up a lot of space and things like that. So at that point, 002 had already come out and had been out for a while, frankly. So 001 was a very dated setup, but he still had it in like a road case, and it was a compact kind of unit that he could just give to me to practice on. So all my money I was making, I was saving up to buy a monitor and saving up to buy, you know, big speakers, saving up to buy headphone amps and just like things like that, so I can kind of have my own rig at home. I bought a Mac because it needed to run through a Mac, so I bought the Mac big desktop. I think it was a G4 or something that I had at the time. And I borrowed his 001 rig, and I really accomplished a lot with that in terms of being able to record ideas, because I didn't have my shitty little red Fostex that I really didn't know how to use. This was more user-friendly, and I could see it in front of me on the screen, on the monitors, and I recorded a lot more. That's when things really started to happen more with Krigsgrav, with writing ideas. So at that point, that's when I said to Chris, let's do another demo. because we can't hand out the Skogsbygd one anymore. Plus, those songs are not very good. Performance and the recording, not very good. So we can do better than that. So we had written one song, a bit of an identity crisis at the time, because part of me wanted to go full on like Dark Throne, just primitive black metal, but I was really taken with the black and roll kind of style. Songs like Fuel for Hatred by Satyricon and stuff like that. I really loved Carpathian Forest, that kind of punkish vibe to it. So I was experimenting with that. So we wrote one original song, and then we did 2 covers on what ended up being our first actual Krigsgrav demo, which was called As Darkness Falls Above, which I laugh at now because I'm like, well, typically things rise above and they fall below, so technically I should say As Darkness Falls Below, but I titled it As Darkness Falls Above. Don't know why. At this point, I had a logo hand-drawn, but I didn't know how to get that onto a front cover yet. Like, I didn't possess the abilities to scan it and save it a certain way and use Photoshop and put it on. Like, I didn't know any of that. So, like, I had the logo, but I couldn't use it. So I just chose a font, chose a, public domain image. Don't remember what it was. I think it was a war grave, honestly. And we just made the demo and did it all in the exact same way. I printed it all off at the old folks' home, cut them up at the old folks' home with the paper cutter, got the same slim trays, the same black discs, and it was 3 songs. So we had our original, which was called Night of Broken Glass, which I wrote the music, Chris wrote the lyrics, and it sounded pretty good. Like, we really were doing a good job of this kind of black and roll style. Really happy with most of that song. The middle section goes off the rails a bit. That's in terms of the focus. But and then we did a cover of Countess Bathory from Venom. And my favorite part of the whole demo is we did a Carpathian Forest cover of Skjend Hans Lik. And that's, of course, sung entirely in Norwegian, which we did not speak. We knew words. We knew certain words and phrases because we tried to study it a bit before we went to Oslo in 2006. But yeah, so basically I, in Oslo, in fact, bought a Carpathian Forest DVD, the We're Going to Hollywood for This live DVD. And so we basically just would go in the other room, the upstairs living room, put the DVD on, put it on that song. We would watch it, line by line, pause it, write down the Hooked on Phonics version of what it sounds like he said. Like, we had the actual lyrics in front of us as well, but again, it's in Norwegian, so our knowledge of it was not great. So yeah, we had to write down, like, phonetically what this sounds like so we can try our best with the pronunciation. I think I'm better with the pronunciation than Chris was. He still kind of sounded very American, but we did it. Well, I mean, we went 1 or 2 lines at a time, and he'd sing it, and we'd stop, and we'd go back in the other room and see what the next 2 lines are or whatever, and write it down. He'd come in, sing those. So it was very pieced together vocally. But when it was all said and done, and I've come to realize, like, you can't hear the drums that well on the DVD. I didn't have the original version of the song to listen to, so I just drummed what I thought I was hearing on the DVD. Turns out I wasn't doing certain things correctly, spots that need double bass that I wasn't doing double bass and stuff like that, but I'm still really happy with that cover, and it's still fun to listen to. And it was nice to kind of finally have this is the first one that felt like a real accomplishment for Krigsgrav, I would say. Yeah, that one felt good when it was all done, because we kind of did the same thing. We weren't signed. I think I sent it out a few places. Of course, back then you kind of had to send it physically, send a press kit or something to these labels and hope you hear back. And you know, we didn't really hear anything back, but I was content with just making copies, handed them to people at shows, things like that. And people, of course, they're friends and acquaintances and all that, so they may have just been nice, but most people seem to enjoy it. Plus, the sound quality was just much better from the original demo, having that 001 rig from JT, allowing me to experiment and get better at recording and be able to mic up my kit properly and things like that. My mixing capabilities were non-existent, really, but I did my best with it, and I was pretty happy with that. Eventually, I saved up my money and got myself a 002 rig, and of course, the moment I had enough money to get the 002, they had just come out with the 003. So actually, it worked in my favor, because they marked down the price of those 002s, so I got myself a pretty good rig there, which I used for many, many years until just maybe a handful of years ago. I finally downsized, because Pro Tools made it to where you don't need that big giant piece of hardware anymore, which is wonderful. So even now, I'm recording on Pro Tools on just a small little laptop here, which is very convenient. So yeah, all the while, Obsidian Throne was still doing our thing. We ended up releasing our demo in either 05 or early 06, and then we did an EP called Behind the Veil, and once again worked with JT at Nomad Studios, and that was in 2000, recorded in 07 maybe, and released in 08 or something like that. But just maintained that working relationship with JT. I was still interning with him whenever I was working on the next Krigsgrav. We ended up doing kind of a mini album, like EP type thing, called Arcana Imperi. Another foolish decision. Still couldn't figure out my logo, so I just have a font on that as well. Went for another public domain cover because I didn't have money to pay an artist. Inadvertently ended up choosing the same image that Dimmu Borgir used on their For All Tid album. So I didn't realize that till it was too late, but I'm not the only one who has used that. I've seen that same cover image like at least 4 times from other bands, so it just kind of makes me laugh. But yeah, that one was fun because I actually had some help from JT. Like, we did a re-recording of Night of Broken Glass, which was on the As Darkness Falls Above demo. At this point, it's still me doing all instruments and things like that. Chris did lyrics. I had not kind of taken over any lyric duties at that point. He did all the lyrics on the original songs on this one. But yeah, the songs came together pretty well. Definitely still settled in on kind of that black and roll vibe. But this was recorded by me at home. I did another cover on this, so this one had four originals and then a cover. And it was a Gorgoroth cover, and I've covered Gorgoroth a few times, and I kind of do it for a couple reasons. Because I'm a Gorgoroth fan, I like the songs, but also because they are so secretive about lyrics. They do not post their lyrics anywhere. You can't find their lyrics. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do some Gorgoroth covers, and I'm going to figure out these lyrics. I'm going to figure out what he's saying, and I'm going to cover them, because I think that's one of the reasons why they don't post their lyrics, is they don't want people's reactions to them, and they don't want people to understand them and copy them, basically. So it was kind of a funny little, like, I'm going to stick it to them and do a cover, and I'm going to figure out these lyrics. But yes, first song was called Maelstrom, and then we had the re-recording of Night of Broken Glass. I think the only difference, there was nothing really structurally that changed. I think I just changed the tempo slightly to a slightly faster tempo. And then right there in the middle was the Gorgoroth cover of Sign of an Open Eye. Loved that record, so I love that song. Their slower songs like that kind of march along are excellent to me. And I'm a big fan of that Gaul era. So yeah, did that one, which was fun, and then Primeval Waves, and then a song called Revolt, which was kind of more of a high energy one. I think that's the shortest one on there. And then the outro, I tried to take a page from kind of the Funeral Mist and use some, like choir and Gregorian chant type stuff to kind of close it out with this outro. Doesn't really work, doesn't really fit. But I mean, hey, I was still figuring things out. So that came out in, I think it was December of 2008. But JT actually assisted with the mix of this because I was there at a session, in between sessions actually, and he had been letting me hear some new material with the rock and roll band that we ended up, I ended up being in the band with him, but he was letting me hear some new stuff he was working on for that. And we had just done a session with an individual, just a guy who was kind of a regular client. He would write songs and he would come for a session and do all the drums, and then he'd come back the next time and do all the acoustic guitars and bass, and then he had just come back again to do piano or something like that, I think is what we did. So he left, and then we had a band session coming about 2 hours later, so I wasn't going to go home and come back. It's like a 45-minute drive. So we were just hanging out and ordered food or something like that. But he's showing me, bullshit YouTube videos and stuff and killing time. And then I said, hey, I have this material I brought with me on my external hard drive because I wanted you to hear it. And I said, while we're here, do you think that you could clean it up a little, like sound-wise, like not necessarily mix it, but I said, do you think you can kind of make my drums sound as good as they can, and then I can just take it from there? So he's like, yeah, sure. So he did. He kind of EQ'd my drums a certain way that sounded pretty good, and he sound replaced my snare, which I had not done any sort of sound replacement up to that point with any band of mine anyways. And so he sound replaced my snare with a snare sample from one of his songs with the rock and roll band, which was called Silver Loves Mercury. So yeah, that's the Silver Loves Mercury snare. And he ended up leaving my kicks alone. I thought he might sound replace the kicks as well, but he liked the tone he got with the EQing. So yeah, he kind of took care of the drums for me and gave me some tips for how I should mix the rest of it, so I finished the rest of that at home. So yeah, overall, this is a step up sound-wise, mainly because of JT's input, but he also, during that time frame in between those recording sessions, after he finished fixing the drums, he asked, can I put a solo on this song? And it was the song Primeval Waves, I think it was. No, it was Revolt. I think it was Revolt. But he said, can I put a solo on this? He's like, I'm hearing this song and I feel like there's a spot here that needs a solo, and I can't do solos. I still can't. I'm a rhythm guitar player through and through. So I said, yeah, go for it. So very improv. I mean, he had it in his head there just from listening to it. But then he took the guitar and he said, don't tell anyone how I'm doing this because I'm going to lose some street cred. So naturally I'm telling everyone now. But he just laid the guitar flat, like on the table basically. And he did some like two-fingered, tapping thing. But it was stretched out in such a way that to do it, holding the guitar properly would have been more challenging, so he just made it easier for himself and just laid the guitar down and stretched his fingers out to do this tapping thing once he found the notes that he wanted for it. So yeah, he did it basically one take from what I remember, and that's the solo that's on there even now. So didn't get released through a label per se, but Corey, the rhythm guitar player from Obsidian Throne, who had helped us out in the past with recording the Of Ice and Shadows little demo, he had started somewhat of a label, very DIY label called Dead Space Records, and didn't really have any distribution other than he would just post it online and just send it to places to be reviewed and stuff like that. He just did his best to be a hype man, and promote it, but didn't really have any reach. So yeah, technically this was released in December of 2008 through Dead Space Records, but pretty hard to find. I don't even have a physical copy anymore. I don't know what happened to it, but thankfully Corey archived it on some third-party website, so I was able to find it. That was the only thing that I don't have, because I keep a box with multiple copies of like everything I've ever played on, so I can show my grandkids one day that I used to be cool. And that was the only thing I didn't have a physical copy of, but thankfully in preparing for this discussion, I was able to find it on that archive site and download it, so I've actually got something to play off of it. So yeah, that was a fun time, and it was challenging because at that time I was doing Obsidian Throne, and that was still the main focus. We practiced weekly, sometimes more than once. That's where the bulk of the writing was happening. We used to butt heads a lot with writing, but it always produced something good in the end, so it was kind of worth it. But I was always kind of writing on my own for Krigsgrav. Never with any real plan or expectations, you know. Like I said, we weren't really signed, and I wasn't really trying that hard because we were pushing more for Obsidian Throne to be signed. And all through this time, Chris was there, and Chris would write lyrics when he was called upon to do it. But it was never a passion for him, you know. He was in it, and when he was there recording, he took it seriously, and he would do a good job. I would be there recording him and giving guidance and stuff and doing multiple takes, and we'd listen and choose which take we like best and all that kind of stuff. So those were really good times. And around 2009, things changed a little. So 2008, Obsidian Throne actually played the Inferno Festival in Oslo because we got selected. We were an unsigned band, submitted a demo, and out of 550-something selections, they chose us, and they chose a Norwegian band called Whip to play. So we were beyond psyched, of course, and we really thought that was going to launch us, you know, once we played that. But it really didn't do a whole lot for us because we didn't network, we didn't mingle. We were so terrified. We're sitting there in the VIP room with all these legit musicians that we love. And we just didn't make the rounds and talk to people and hand them CDs and build relationships and things like that. So we kind of squandered our opportunity there. But especially with something like that happening, you know, that really made us buckle down and focus even harder on Obsidian Throne and maximizing popularity with that and things like that. But I was still kind of going through a bit of an identity crisis with Krigsgrav because while I enjoyed that kind of black and roll vibe, like you could hear on Maelstrom, the snippet I just played a short while ago there, that the riffs kind of had this atmospheric vibe, very straightforward, typical black metal, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to do that, if I wanted to do black and roll, because I love bands like Cold. Very simplistic approach. And I still kind of wanted to reintroduce some of the thrash elements because, as I said, when I first started playing metal, that's what I gravitated to, and that's what I felt most comfortable playing on drums. So I kind of wanted to bring that thrashiness back. But I leaned too heavily into it, I would say. And I don't regret anything that I've recorded because it's whatever it is what it was supposed to be. There's always going to be elements that you take from a recording and you say, okay, next time I want to make sure I don't do this and I do this different and all that kind of stuff. Because you always want to keep growing and improving. But I don't look back on any recordings and just think, God, just terrible. What was I thinking, you know? Because that's what it was at the time. And, you know, it's supposed to be a snapshot in time. So yeah, I have no regrets here about the next release, the debut full-length release. And it was done the same way. I think at this point I had my 002 rig. So I no longer needed JT's 001 rig. I had upgraded my stuff, got a newer Mac, and I was up and running. And at this time, I don't really want to say any bad things here, but I will say that Chris had gotten married to an older woman. She was very nice to us, the guys in Obsidian Throne. She was always kind of pleasant to talk to. And it wasn't so much necessarily that she changed him, it's just that he changed once he was married. And he was much more reclusive from band activities. Come to find out, part of that was her making him feel guilty, basically. Like any time he spent away from her, she would convince him that he was neglecting her, that type of thing. So it was tough to work with Chris in Krigsgrav and Obsidian Throne at that time, because even when he would come to practice, which he would cancel fairly regularly at that time, when he would come, it would be, I can only stay here for an hour, guys, and then I gotta go. So anything involving vocals, let's just rehearse that right up front, and then I'll leave, and you guys can keep practicing. And be like, okay. So we made do, but it was clear that the band, both bands, were not even close to a priority at the time. And he ended up exiting from Obsidian Throne. But he still was clinging on to Krigsgrav. I wanted him to do vocals on this next Krigsgrav. So he agreed. And he wrote lyrics for a few songs. And this is my first time writing lyrics for the rest of them. So I wrote lyrics for, maybe 4 of them. And he wrote lyrics for the other 4. And then we did another Gorgoroth cover, just for the hell of it. So I recorded all the music at my parents' house with my rig. And then the vocals were done at Brett, our lead guitar player in Obsidian Throne. It was his house, because his house was the home away from home. Anytime he'd throw a party there or something, and the band would just hang out and be drinking and playing video games and listening to music and all sorts of tomfoolery. But he had a cool setup there, because we would practice there, because we kind of switched from practicing at my parents' house. Finally gave them a break after all those years and started practicing at Brett's once he got his own house. So he had an electronic kit set up there that was hooked into, a speaker and everything so everybody could hear it. And we would just cram into this little bedroom and practice in there. But he had all his recording stuff set up on his big desk in there. And then in the adjacent bedroom, because he didn't have any kids, he was married but no kids, and they had a 3-bedroom house. So the guest room, he had set up as kind of a vocal area. So, necessity being the mother of invention, he built himself a vocal booth out of PVC pipe, like as a frame, and thick, like moving blankets and things like that. And then had the nice mic in there set up with the pop filter and the whole 9 yards. And he had it set up with the talkback microphone and everything. So it was kind of, in our minds, it was pretty professional, pretty legit. So I remember Chris actually was going to be spending much of the evening over there, which was rare at that time. The other guys were hanging out on the back patio, and I think Brett had a hookah or something, so they were probably messing with that and drinking and stuff. So me and Chris stayed in the music rooms and knocked out the vocals for this, and really didn't have much of a plan. Like, we had the lyrics sorted out, but I hadn't really sorted out like the vocal melodies, other than just what I had in my head for how I wanted him to sing my lyrics. And then he kind of knew how he wanted to sing his lyrics, but we hadn't really gone over that with each other yet. So he was in there, did his vocals. They were a little. I mean, they've always been a little one-dimensional in Krigsgrav because he tended to always use his higher voice, higher scream, and we didn't do a lot of layering with gutturals and stuff underneath. But this one felt overly one-dimensional. It wasn't a bad performance, but there just wasn't much dynamics to it vocally. So I ended up kind of going the 1349 route, at least on one of their releases. So I put distortion, slight distortion, on all of his vocals, just to nasty them up a little bit. But I remember we did a cover of Possessed by Satan by Gorgoroth, and there was a moment when he says possessed, and then there's kind of a pause, and then he chimes back in with by Satan. And Chris, while he was recording, grabbed this toy that was Brett's nephews or nieces or whatever that they had left over there, and it was this little toy like megaphone where you just hold down the button and it's like a voice changer type thing. So he said the by Satan part into the megaphone and sang through that into the microphone, and it sounds so it's ridiculous because I know what it is, but for anyone else who hears it, it sounds like a vocal effect. But the fact that, you know, most people probably think it was some sort of a effect that I put on in post or something like that. But no, that was him picking up the toy megaphone and singing by Satan through it, so you can hear that. But overall, musically, I think I leaned too far into the thrashy aspect of things on this album. You know, the debut album we ended up calling the Leviathan Crown. No real meaning to it, just liked the way it sounded. And same with the lyrics, I would say. Like, the early lyrics of Krigsgrav was nothing more than just storytelling and random topics that we thought were interesting and stuff like that. There was no real message or meaning or you know, deeper thing about those lyrics. So same with the titles and the covers and things like that. When I say that it was not the priority, Krigsgrav, I mean it. Like, it was always there, but real thought was not being put into it in terms of thinking long term, you know. But I leaned too hard here with the Leviathan Crown into kind of that necrophobic kind of sound. I was listening to a lot of necrophobic and a lot of Treldom, who I love, except for this new atrocity that they just released. But yeah, there's still some really cool songs on here. My favorite's probably The Descent. There's another slow one, kind of like Sign of an Open Eye. It's called Nord. Really liked that one a lot. Atrocities of Beauty's the opening track, and that was the first one written. All of it came together pretty quick. Like, I remember I wrote it all and played it all, recorded it on this cheap blue ESP guitar, really low-end model that I still have for my son to use. And it just, I used the Line 6 Spider amp of my brother's that he had left at my, you know, parents' house. So it was more of just like, I used what I had. I didn't really seek out better gear or things like that. But I was kind of proud of that mix. That was my, you know, my best mix to date. Still wasn't very good at it, but I was improving. And recorded a lot of this in 2009, and we ended up kind of releasing it in the spring of 2010, but that was very independent. I did it the exact same way as the previous two releases. Slim cases, the cardstock front cover, another public domain image of, you know, it was the Midgard serpent, and which had no real correlation to the title other than it being a Leviathan. But yeah, I mean, overall, we were happy with that, and that was another one that I would hand out to people at shows, and the reaction would get stronger. People would say, you know, that was pretty damn cool. So it felt good, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel genuine, because I felt like I was trying too hard to force the sound and force the style to be something that I wasn't sure it should. So after that, it felt good to have it done and released. The fact that I got one more performance out of Chris before he ultimately stepped out, and but it felt like an end of an era, so to speak. So the next thing I did really needed to be something new and creatively different. But I think it was the pictures we did around this time as when we got a shotgun pointed at us. That was fun. So I got to share that story. We were going to do some band photos. We hadn't done any in a while. Most of ours in the past had just been individual shots of me and Chris that we would put backgrounds and all sorts of effects and stuff on them to where you can barely see us and stuff like that. It was just all Photoshop. So this time we said, all right, let's try to get like a legit real background here. So there we were, bullet belts, spiky gauntlets with the nails, all the cliches. We weren't in corpse paint. I will say that. We've had our corpse paint pictures, for sure, that are lost in the ether somewhere from our old MySpace page that just we never saved them, and now I have no idea how to get them. So there's some old corpse painted photos of us out there somewhere in the internet. But no, at this point we had dropped the corpse paint, and we drove around with Craig, because Craig's the man. I mean, he's filled in on bass for us. He's played all sorts of roles for us, letting us borrow gear. In this case, he was our photographer. I think he borrowed a camera from his parents. And we're driving around, and we found this wooded area, but it's a suburban community off of a main road. And right on the corner, near the main road, is this square of wooded area where there's no houses. So very little space. We're talking 100 yards by 100 yards maybe. So we said, well, maybe we can just park here on the side of the road, and we'll just walk 30 feet into this wooded area, just enough to where you can see what looks like dark woods behind us. You can't see any houses in the background. It just looks like we're standing in the woods. And get a few photos and we'll go. So we do that, and we get out, go walking up, crunching through the leaves and stuff. And we're kind of setting up. Craig's, there's nothing really to set up. We're just kind of finding a spot where we want to strike a pose here. And Craig's getting the camera ready to go. And then we hear the sound of a shotgun being cocked. Never a good sound. And then this middle-aged man, comes from around the corner of the fence that was kind of off to the side that led to the backyard of the first house of this suburban community connected to this wooded area. So he lives right on the corner there, and I guess he's kind of Mr. Neighborhood Watch guy, keeps an eye on everything. So yeah, he just comes flying around the corner like Danny Glover in Lethal Weapon or something, and he's like, freeze! Hands in the air, but he looks shaky. He looks shaky with it. Like, it looks like this is the first time I've ever had to jump into action and point a gun at somebody. So he looks shaky with the shotgun, and we're just like, oh my god. And so yeah, we got hands in the air. Turns out he had already called the cops before he confronted us, which then makes the confrontation even dumber, because it's like, why would you call the cops to come resolve this and then insert yourself into it with a gun? Basically, there had been people, apparently, kids, going into that wooded area in recent weeks and like screwing around with fireworks, setting little small fires and stuff in there. So this dude thought, oh, those kids are back and I've got them now, So yeah, we had hands in the air and all that. So we come out to the sidewalk and we're explaining we're just a band and wanted to take some pictures in this little wooded area, and that's it, So once he realized that we were fine, he lowers his gun or whatever and puts it away. and told us just to sit. He's like, I already called the cops though, so let's wait for them. So the cops show up, check our IDs and all that, make sure we don't have any warrants. So then, yeah, we just basically said we thought this was just free space here. Like, there's no fence or anything like that around it. No barbed wire, no chain link fence, no nothing. And he said there is a sign, but it's on the complete other side of this, area that says, it's private property. It was for sale, basically, and nobody had bought it, but it was still privately owned, which we didn't know. So we said, well, I'm sorry. We just came here to get some pictures and maybe 10 minutes tops, and then we were going to leave. So the whole thing was pretty amusing, and we did actually get a few decent photos out of it. But yeah, that was a rough experience for our photos. But we tended to do sketchy crap like that, because another one of our photo shoots was at Park Glen in, I guess it's considered Fort Worth here in Texas. And the park is closed after like 10 p.m., so naturally we went at like midnight when it's pitch dark. And we're in all black with bullet belts and corpse paint and the spiky gauntlets and all that stuff. So we just quickly, literally ran out. Brett was the photographer that time, and he had like a floodlight and like a little generator or something like that. So he used the floodlight to give us just enough light for him to take some photos. And I was still growing my hair back out because I had long hair in high school, and then I buzzed it all off, and then I started growing it back out again. So I had, David Spade hair pretty much with corpse paint on. Looked ridiculous, but he took some good pictures of us there, and then we had to quickly shut the light off and sprint back to his car and get out of there before somebody in the adjacent neighborhood would notice, that there's people there after hours at the park. Just stupid. Bunch of posers. But yeah, so that was kind of the end of an era with the Leviathan crown, and after that, the mindset really was, it was an end of an era with Obsidian Throne. We still kept going. We got a new singer. At that point, Corey from Obsidian Throne wasn't in it anymore. And that was a tough call as well, because he was a founding member of that and a good friend and Craig's cousin. But he had kind of cried wolf a few too many times with quitting the band, and said he was going to quit and then changed his mind and says he's going to quit, and then calls the next day and says, hey guys, sorry. And I got tired of that. Still love Corey to death. He's a good friend. And we get along great. That's all. That hatchet was buried a long time ago. But yeah, at that time, he had quit over something, and I just kind of said, well, then that's it. Like, you can't quit that many times and just expect to keep coming back. So it was a little bit of a tense split at the time. But we had a new guitar player and a new singer, and we were continuing on. But with Krigsgrav, I ended up going the route of like, Old Man's Child. It's kind of like when Galder was in Dimmu Borgir, whoever was drumming for Dimmu at the time, he would use them on his next Old Man's Child album, because he did it with Nick Barker, and then he did it with that Reno guy. I forget his last name, starts with a K, but he did that with that guy on Vermin. So I kind of did the same thing. Like, we had this new singer in Obsidian Throne, Jared, and I just asked him, do you want to do vocals on the next Krigsgrav whenever that time comes? And he's like, yeah, sure, just let me know. And that was kind of the start of the next chapter. So I knew that I wanted to change the style, but I didn't know what I wanted it to be, and that was the point. I just wanted to write what I write, see what comes out, and at least I know it'll be genuine, it'll be authentic. It won't be forced. I'm not trying to sound a certain way like I was on the Leviathan Crown. So the music came together very quickly because it was very stream of consciousness, just like this conversation we're having right now, this rambling. But I wrote it all at my parents' house at night over the course of just a couple months, really. And that album ended up being Lux Capta Est, and I knew it was good. And it sounds arrogant, but I was like, I know this is the best thing I've done, maybe better than anything I've done with Obsidian Throne. Like, this might be the best thing I've ever done. And overall, it was slower and grander. It just felt bigger, more atmosphere. I was listening to more atmospheric stuff. Like, I was listening to a ton of like Primordial, Drutk. There was a Russian duo, and they were called Walnut, and that's Walknut. And I can't remember the name. I think they're Russian. If they're not, my apologies. But they released one record, and I can't remember the name of it because it was in another language, I think. Don't quote me on that. But they released one record, and that's it. They haven't done anything since. But it was drum machine, two guys, and it was very atmospheric, very Drutk-esque. But I loved that record. And that kind of influenced, I'd say, my writing. So the songs were long. I was no longer afraid to incorporate acoustic guitars and things like that, because early on, I mean, it's black metal. I want it to be loud and nasty. And this time it was like, I don't really care about that. Like, if I have a section that I think would sound good with acoustic guitars, then I'm going to use them. If I want keys in there, we're going to use them. We've got choirs going in there. You know, I wrote all the lyrics for this one and had all the vocal patterns arranged and in mind. So this was probably the most involved, which is weird to say, having written all the music in the past as well. But this was the most like fully focused and involved that I felt up to that point. And having focused and written all the lyrics, and I had this thing that I knew was going to be good. Instead of doing it myself at home with the same gear, I wanted there to be a step up in sound here. So I asked Brett, because remember, he had his studio set up there at his home. I said, hey Brett, can I record at your place and use your variety of guitars and amps and things like that, and I want this to sound the best it can sound. So he said, yeah, absolutely. So I did the drums at home, because I, of course, have my kit set up there already, mic'd up already. So I did the drums myself, and then took that over to Brett's. And I love Brett, but he was a chore to just get him to be where he says he's going to be at the time he says he's going to be there, because my voice has been going all day, so I'm wearing out here. But he would say, come by after work. Like, I would work the lunch shift or something, and I'd be like, yeah, can I come over there at like 2 and just track for like 3 hours, and then I'll get out of your hair, because then his wife would come home and they would want to eat dinner and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say, hey, how about Tuesday, 2 o'clock? Absolutely, sounds good. Tuesday at noon or something, I would text him and say, hey, are we still good to track today? And I'd hear nothing. And text him an hour later, hey man, we still good? Nothing. So then I'd get out of work and I would just go there and be like, well, we said we'd do this at 2, so I'm just going to show up. And I'd show up and he wouldn't be home. And then I would leave angrily, and then he'd call me like an hour later and just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I was at lunch with my mom, or oh, I was getting my oil changed, or, you know. I'm like, dude, like we said we were going to do this at 2 o'clock, what happened, you know? So there was a ton of that at that time period. So it took ages to finish recording because of just these mix-ups like that. So just getting Brett to sit still for me to come to his house and record was a challenge. But it was worth it, because he had a wide array of guitars. So I remember for one half I used his BC Rich Bitch, and then the other side I used an Epiphone Explorer, beautiful, the natural wood grain, that had a real nice kind of retro like crunch to it that I used on one side. Lead guitars, I used this modified Stratocaster that he had. It was mostly Fender parts, but it had some like a different neck on it or something like that. It was this Frankenstein of a thing. but it sounded beautiful for clean tones and lead guitar tones. So I used that for leads. I can't remember the brand of his acoustic guitar, but it definitely sounded better than mine. I actually have a good one now, but for a long time I had just this hand-me-down guitar that served its purpose but didn't sound great. But his sounded very nice. The bass, I actually used this stupid bass because when I played in Silver Loves Mercury, which was that rock and roll band with JT, we had played a Battle of the Bands. I played bass in that band most of the time. I was kind of a utility knife, you know. If drummer had quit, then I would switch to drums and we'd get a fill-in bass player, and then, you know, I'd switch back to bass once they found a drummer and stuff like that. So that night I was playing bass, and I won Best Bass Player of the Night, which cracks me up because I'm a drummer. Like, I know how to play bass and I know how to play guitar, but I am a drummer through and through. So I won Best Bass Player of the Night, which cracks me up. So I won a gig bag and a light wave bass. So the thing looks like a freaking toy because it doesn't have a nice finish on it. It was just this shiny red finish. It felt like the lightest instrument you've ever felt. So it felt cheap. But it's like a $1,400 bass. So the reason for that is because it uses optical pickups instead of this, you know, the normal pickups that use like radio waves or whatever. It uses an optical sensor to produce the signal. So basically when you strike the string, that sensor can see how hard the string is vibrating and it'll generate the sound accordingly. The problem with that is it did not have any kind of real growl or character to it. You might as well have just used a bass guitar setting on a keyboard because it produced such a smooth, crystal clear signal and sound. It just had no character to it whatsoever, and no matter how you EQ'd it, it just didn't sound good. It filled out the sound enough, but it wasn't great. But that's what I had, so I used the light wave bass. I was convinced that this expensive thing was going to be what I needed to use. You know, it's fancy gear. I'm going to use this fancy bass, and when you listen to it now, you can't even really hear what the bass is doing on that record because it's so mild and in the background. But yes, it took a while to record. It didn't take long to write, but it took a while to record. And then it came time for Jared to do his vocals, and that was fun. He was very open to critique and guidance and things like that because he knew he's not the singer of this band. He's just helping out. So I would give him the lyrics, kind of softly sing the cadence of how I think this verse should go, and he would copy it. And then we just would move section by section. And if he had a little idea of like, oh, what if I do it in this voice, you know, or what if I threw a growl underneath this one to fill it out, like a layer here. So yeah, that sounds good. So knocked that out fairly quick. That was also my first foray into clean vocals. It didn't end up making it onto the record because it would have been just way too long. But I did a one-man cover of the song For My Demons by Catatonia, and I sang on it. And that was my first foray into recording myself singing clean vocals, because now since then I do clean vocals pretty much any time that we have clean vocals in a Krigsgrav song or choirs in the background, stuff like that. I still do those, but that was my first time. It's out there on YouTube as well somewhere, that cover, if you want to hear it. But yeah, Lux Copta Est, 5 songs. Like I said, they were long. I think that there's only one song, Mourner's Requiem, was the only one under 10 minutes. So it was a departure for sure, because Leviathan Crown had shorter songs, much more fast and concise, and this was just bigger and longer and more atmospheric, slower overall. I used another public domain cover, but I altered it slightly. It was a Beksinski painting that was initially kind of a yellowish green, you know, kind of tones, and I just made it very dark and made it blue and black, which is frankly a disservice to that painting. But I don't know. I didn't want to just flat out use the guy's painting. I wanted to change it a bit. So, But it was recorded over the course of like 3 months. It was throughout the whole spring of 2011, basically, and came out in July. And I say came out. It was another Dead Space Records, type thing, to where it was just released digitally, and did the same thing again. Slim cases, cardstock cover, handed them to people. But this was different, because when I was handing them to people, it got a much better reaction. It was mixed by Brett. That was his first foray into mixing, and it sounds weird. It's a weird sounding record, which is a shame, because the recording was very thorough, and we used very good equipment and took our time with it and stuff like that. It doesn't sound bad. You can still hear every instrument pretty clearly. It's fairly balanced. It just has this weird overall tone to it. That mix, along with some of my songwriting choices, particularly sections that are just way too long. Like there might be certain instrumental sections where I'm playing a certain riff 12 times and I'm listening to it and I'm like, there's no reason why I should have played that more than 4 times before going to the next section. So stuff like that, along with the mix, is the reason why we have chosen to re-record it, which we've been slowly pecking away at this year. We haven't really aggressively attacked it, but all the music is done and we're just finishing up some vocals, and then we will mix this thing. And so there's been some slight structural changes, but other than that, everything's pretty much the same, and we're just hoping for a better mix, updated cover art, stuff like that. So that'll be a fun thing when it's released. I wanted to do that in 2021 for the 10-year anniversary. I wanted to do a full remix and remaster, but the tracks have mysteriously vanished. I, for some reason, did not have the sessions, so I had to ask Brett, do you still have the sessions? He said, yeah, I should. I'm pretty sure I do, so he ended up finding the vocal tracks and the drums, and that was it. So we couldn't do a remix and remaster, so that's why we ultimately just said, should we just re-record this whole thing? And that's exactly what we're doing. But this album is the genesis for Krigsgrav turning into a full band, because it was the other guys that heard the material. Corey Smith, not Corey from Obsidian Throne, my other friend and bandmate Corey, and Justin, who is of course still in Krigsgrav today, the driving force. The two of them heard it and basically kind of cornered me, so to speak, and said, this is damn good, and we want in, basically. But it was really rewarding, because I not only felt great about this record, having kind of cut loose and just written whatever I felt like writing, I knew there was nothing like this in our local scene. There was black metal bands, but they weren't doing that. And I knew I had created something good, and then to get the response it got from people was really nice. And then ultimately for it to kind of launch Krigsgrav into this next chapter is special. Yeah, so that record was a real game changer for the trajectory of Krigsgrav from there, because then, as I said, Corey and Justin, I think we were hanging out at Justin's house, because how I knew them was back in the day with Obsidian Throne, we played a festival in Arlington, Texas. And it was called the Metal Up Your Ass Festival. And it was cool. Like, it was 2 stages. The touring package that was coming through for that was like Vader, Cataclysm, Destruction, The Absence, and Speed, Kill, Hate, which had featured members of Overkill. And second stage, they just turned it into an all-day thing. And they had some local bands play the big stage, like early on. Some local bands played the second stage. Obsidian Throne played the second stage, and it was so fucking hot. They had these floodlights set up for the second stage. It was very DIY, and I swear to God, those things were freaking heat lamps from a you know, a lizard tank or something. We were dying up there, but it was fun. And one of the other bands on the bill was called Valsgard. And I feel like I had heard of or seen Valsgard at some point, but I knew that they kind of had like a Viking thing going on. So sure enough, it's hot as hell outside. All these bands with all this gear, waiting to bring their stuff inside and all that. Or maybe we just had brought our stuff inside and now we were just kind of hanging out until the show started. And I saw them, a couple of them at least, wearing their tunics, like Viking tunics. And I was like, I'm going to go introduce myself. And they were young, as was I, really, but introduced myself, and they kind of gave me a look of like they just didn't really know what to say in response. They just kind of said, "Oh, it's cool, good to meet you," you know. And so it was a very tepid first meeting there, but they were great live. And then I saw them again opening for Fintroll, I want to say, at Ridgely Theater in Fort Worth. And at that point, both Corey and Justin were in Valsgard. Justin wasn't always, but at one point he was. And out of nowhere, I think it was still in the MySpace days. Of course, I was late to the game joining Facebook anyways, but I think, I was still just on MySpace and stuff back then. But they sent me a message, the guys in Valsgard. Said, "Hey, our drummer, Sean," which is Corey's brother, is wanting to switch from drums to bass and vocals. So we need a drummer, and we thought of you, would you be interested? So I said, yeah, and they played out in Mesquite. And from where I lived in Keller, Texas, Mesquite was over an hour, about an hour and 10 minutes away. And they would practice like every Tuesday in the garage of this house that they were all living in. Justin didn't live there, but Sean and Corey and a friend of theirs, this guy Matt, lived there. So the garage was kind of their space. So I would drive out every Tuesday after working and all that and drive out to Mesquite, and that was the most fun. Those practices, they were great because they're just great dudes, and we would just drink beers. I remember that was the first time I ever had a what the hell are they called? Grolsch, the green bottles with the little flip top, those beers. But yeah, we just formed a real bond and didn't ultimately do much. Like when I joined Valsgard, I learned the songs. We played 2 shows, 1 show maybe. I think it was just 1 show. We played opening up for Candlemass and Daylight Dies, which was a great first show to have for sure. And we did all the other stuff. Took promotional, band pictures and got a new logo. Started working on new material and all that, and then it just kind of fizzled because Sean kind of didn't want to do it anymore, and so it just turned into other things basically. So like I started playing in a band with Sean and Corey after at least 6 months, I'd say, of us not really doing anything. Sean kind of hit me up and wanted to start something new, which ended up being called Of Oak, and played in Of Oak for several years with Sean and Corey. Justin had moved further south, so he's kind of in the Belton area of Texas, which is about 2.5 hours south of us. And it all kind of took going to see Immortal for things to come back. So like, we went to go see Immortal and Absu and drove down to San Antonio. And while walking from the car to the venue, I heard my name from across the street, and it was Justin and his wife, and hadn't seen him in forever. So they had come down for the show as well, and that was amazing. That was so great to see him and just to hang out. And of course, we had to have our shots of Jameson and stuff like that, and just reconnect and talk. And I was chatting with his wife, and she's like, well, he doesn't get, mushy with things, and he probably wouldn't tell you, but he misses you. Like, he misses working with you. He loved working with you, and he would love to do it again. And hopefully, maybe you guys can do something like that in the future. And I was like, well, that's really cool, to hear. And ditto, like I loved playing in a band with Justin. So that kind of established communication again. And then the times that we had hung out after that, I would come down with Corey. And then, yeah, that was when they basically said, like, that most recent Krigsgrav, Lux Capta Est, is so damn good. Like, you need to play that live. Would you want to play that live? Because we would happily join the live band. Because it's really good. It should be played live. And I hadn't really thought of it at all. So I think it was kind of on the spot, like there at Justin's house, and we were hanging out, and I was like, yeah, like I would love that actually. And we got Craig, Obsidian Throne Craig, to join in, because at that point Obsidian Throne had kind of fizzled by 2011, going on to 2012. So yeah, Craig was kind of looking for something too. He's never been much of a black metal guy, so I don't think he joined with any sort of real, permanence there. But he was like, yeah, I'll be your live guy for as long as you want me to. So yeah, we booked a show and played a show, and it was great. It was in Austin at a club called Headhunters, which is no more, unfortunately. But yeah, then we just started writing new music, and that's kind of where it took off from there. And it was very collaborative and exciting just to have other musicians in the fold contributing riffs and entire songs and things like that. And that's what ultimately became the Carrion Fields, and then we've continued on as a full band ever since. And even through lineup changes and things like that, I mean, it got down to a point where it was just me and Justin, back to a two-man thing, and then we got Cody back in, or not back in, but we got Cody in because he was helping us for live stuff. Whenever Justin couldn't, Cody would fill in, so he was already connected to the Krigsgrav family there. But once we got him as a permanent member, and then got Wes back, is where we're at now, and things are just stronger than they've ever been, really. But yeah, that was such a pivotal time, and it's the reason why we're here now, 20 years in, is because it could have easily stopped after Lux Capta Est. Felt like this big achievement for me to have written that and recorded that, and if I had stopped right then, I would have been fine. I think, like, I would have. I don't think I ever would have stopped, because there was no pressure at all. So it's like, if I wanted to take 5 years off and then write something new, I could. There was no rules. There still is no rules. We could do whatever the hell we want. But yeah, who knows? Who knows what would have happened to Krigsgrav if they hadn't told me, hey, you should be playing this live. You should turn this into a full band, because that was the best decision ever. Because truly, I listened to so much music, and the scope of kind of where I would take the sound of Krigsgrav, still, even listening to as much as I listen to and having as much influences as I have, I feel like my abilities would only be able to get me so far as continuing writing all the material for Krigsgrav. So having the colorful palette of skills and influences and creativity of these other members is really what makes it special. I mean, Justin is a creative monster when it comes to coming up with new riffs and new songs. He just writes and writes and writes, and it's always fantastic. And it's so hard to whittle down these ideas for each new record because it's all so good, and it's such a good problem to have, you know. But ultimately, it's, you know, it sounds very like mushy and emotional here, but it's such a privilege to not only just work with the people I work with, but it's such a privilege to exist on this planet at this time, because the whole idea of metal music, just modern music, is not that old. The fact that we're here now at this time when all of this great music exists is amazing. And it's like I said, it's a privilege to not only be amongst it, but to contribute to it as well, and to have people listen to it and enjoy it. And it's just going to be pretty damn cool when I'm an old man to look back at what we've done musically and be able to show that to people, and I'll take pride in it forever. Even the shittiest of old demos played its role in getting us to where we're at right now. So thank you, everybody who's ever been handed a demo by me at a show, anyone who's ever just taken the time to listen, who's bought merch, who's said positive things, told other people about the band, you know, anyone who just has shown any interest in it whatsoever. There's, you know, millions of bands out there these days, and the fact that our stuff resonated with you in any way is amazing, and we're thankful for that. So it's been a great 20 years, and we are not stopping anytime soon. As long as we feel like we've got good music in us and we've got something to say, we're going to keep going with it. We keep steadily improving, in my opinion. And as you saw, you know, we're going to re-record Lux Capta Est. Of course, that's basically done, and that should be out, you know, I don't know, within the next 4 months, if I were to guess. And then we've got 2 more albums on a deal with Willowtip Records. So at the very least, you're getting 2 more out of us. But I think you'll get more after that, if I'm being honest. But stay tuned for that. And thanks for a good 20 years, and here's to 20 more. This is David, and I'm out.